When looking at an extraordinary landscape, there are no questions, no answers, no desires, no plans, no worries, no past, no present, no future. There's only a deep silence. Mehmet Murat İlden wrote that, the Turkish author and thinker who also said, and this I think I'll take to the beach this year, sunset is the perfect time to go swimming because the sun enters the same sea with you on the horizon. Poetic. Write a picture, a sketchbook to start the day. Barney, you can't have a treat just yet. We've hardly even started the walk. Let me get a picture. A sketchbook. Shutter speed 240th f5.6 ISO 160. Just to show you where we are. It doesn't change too much, really, for me with my walks, but it's nice to get a picture to start the show. Right, do you want a treat? You haven't done anything to deserve it. Come on.
The Photowalk.
I think this week's letters to the show, they remind me just how precious this community is that we're building here. I know I say that reasonably often, but I think it's probably worth underlining. We're building a show that's got very special contributors, and I think the letters today, well, they surprised me in all kinds of ways, in all manner of ways, including a letter from somebody whose lens professionally is trained on the sort of things that you and I wouldn't even want to meet in the most graphic of horror movies, to be honest. There's light, there's shade, and I'm not just talking about the technical photography side of those words. There's light, there's shade, there's humour, there's surprise, there's two guests. Valerie Jardin is here for visual stories in the feature roughly in the middle of the show. Hang on, there's a cyclist coming through. Morning.
Hi.
Come on, this way. We're talking landscapes today with a guest from the east of England lands, Jill Moon, a photographer and an author for almost, best part of 2 decades, a believer in publishing your work, somebody who's found the secret to making pictures in and within flat landscapes that, some might find uninspiring. Not Jill's photos, that is, the landscape that you stand in, but the sort of lands and scapes that thinkers like Mehmet Murat İlden may describe as the kind of places that deliver a deep silence. I'm also very inspired today by a project we'll talk about, a book that's engaged people to be a part of a photographic project without the need to be photographers. So Jill Moon is my guest, wordsmith, traveller, photographer, walker.
Today on the Photowalk.
If you're just going out for a walk, you tend to observe stuff, but you don't tend to notice it really well. Whereas if you go out for a walk with your camera, you might notice the flowers on the beach or the shells or birds in the trees or whatever. You notice different bits and pieces.
It's the Photowalk, you and I making some pictures with our cameras or smartphones, sketchbooking our walk together, all made possible by our extra milers and mpb.com, which is a great way to buy, sell and trade used camera gear online. And I know this because I use them myself to buy quality new to me kits like lenses, camera bodies and other accessories. Actually, the X100V that I'm using on today's walk, my Fujifilm X100V, that was bought through mpb.com. And you know I love that camera very much. If you're buying, you get peace of mind with a 6-month guarantee. And if you're trading or selling, MPB will send a courier. They'll pick up your kit on a day that you say, and once it's arrived back at the warehouse, they'll go through some checks to make sure that it's been graded properly. And then if all is good, you get paid direct into your account quickly. mpb.com is an easy-to-use website. It's helping photographers to buy quality used kit or sell gear you no longer need to free up some cash and give others a chance to make their stories. Go to mpb.com and I'll have a link, of course, on today's show page. On the show then, make wall art, not war. Not quite sure that quote has improved upon the original, but I tell you what, this idea may have you reaching for a small posi drive, some backing card or map card, a frame and insert favourite old camera here. There's inspiration too for taking a first step along the trail for your next or maybe first adventure. Thoughts about making street pictures in a world which is becoming increasingly more guarded about privacy. You can't take my picture, it's against the law, don't you know? Delete it. I want to stand over you and watch you do it. We talk road trips. And there's the most extraordinary letter today from a crime scene investigator. Jason Florio pops up, as my mum used to say, to talk about what he loves about the place we're going to in January, the Gambia. Just to underline, by the way, he never popped up to see my mum. That was just her saying. If it had popped in to see my mum, that would have been all kinds of weird. Right, checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots or shoes at this time of the year for me, check. And a look of surprise for what's about to come today. What? That's a weird one. We'll check it anyway. Let's start the walk. My publicist, if I had one, would tell me off for this. What are you doing publicising somebody else? We often do, actually. We talk about podcasts. I think if you're in the podcast sphere, there is such a dimension, then supporting each other, I think that's really important, actually. And so I noted, for reasons that will become far, far clearer right at the tail end of the show today, you'll have to wait for that there is another podcast known as the Photowalk. I think there's a couple, actually. One that's not done anything for so long. So many people start podcasts, and it rarely goes past the seventh, the magic 7 that we've talked about before, the 7th episode. Some know more than 1 or 2, but this one is called the Morning Photowalk. And I apologise, I can't remember the name of the author of this, although he does some work on YouTube as well. It's, I thought, and I'm being cautious as I say this, there was a certain amount of inspiration from this title, and I can't help but think that it must have been listened to by the author because, well, you do that when you launch a podcast. The first thing you do is go look for other titles that could be similar, and just take a listen. Not necessarily to glean ideas, but just to see where the lay lands, as my father would have said. And so yeah, if you are listening today, you have authoring that podcast. You're very welcome. Nice to have you along. As I say, the reasons for mentioning that will become much clearer at the end, because I want you to identify the correct podcast with a request that I cautiously, nervously have. Anyway, I invited you last week to send me some quotes that we can use at the head of the show, and I've had some really wonderful ones. Oh, Barney's going for a swim. This is the deep bit, Barney. I'm not jumping in, telling you. I've had some really wonderful ones which have now made their way to a file called Quotes. Does what it says on the tin moment. As you know, I love that phrase. This first letter today, this feels like a quote though, but it's more of a letter really in terms of length, and it's certainly a great inspiring way to start this week's show. It's from a friend of ours called Wallace Shackleton. Oh, is that the Wallace that does the flying picture? Oh, you know the one. See, I knew straight away. Does some amazing aviation pictures. I will link to them on the show page today, his work on the show page today. Anyway, he writes, Ed Birchmore, your guest from a few weeks ago, who walked from the east of the country to the west, in England land that is. Well, his 500-mile journey started with a single step. And I know how that feels, Neil. Before I retired, during the dark days of the last 10 years of work, I dreamed of making a motorbike journey out to see a relation in the Czech Republic, and 3,300 miles later, I've realised that dream. The dream that kept me going, experiencing the madness of the M25. Well, that's a motorway. You hadn't even got out of the UK. Your adventure's already started. The Channel Tunnel, French motorways, German autobahns, and the... now, did you mean this word? I'm going to read it as you wrote it. The constipation of Brussels in the rush hour. Unless spell checker was having a day off, I don't know. Not to mention the Czech drivers. An exhilarating trip and a very expensive Mercedes. Get you. First World War battlefields and a lot of aircraft, of course, for me, photographed along the way. I even had a day trip to hell. Just to fill in the gaps slightly here, my good friend Giles Penfound, the former army photographer, fantastic documentarian, made a series of pictures in a project called Day Trips to Hell, where he visited, photographed. He's talked of late as well. His feelings, seeing, experiencing firsthand now in this part of history anyway, the concentration camps. So as Wallace writes, I even had a day trip to hell, making unplanned stops at Mittelbaldora, where the birds have relearned how to sing, and an even briefer stop at Buchenwald in the rain, sparing a thought for all the lost souls. It would have been so easy not to have started this trip, this journey, this adventure. For the past 5 years, caring for my late father was my excuse not to go. But now I really know the wisdom of the saying, the greatest journey starts with a single step. I've seen places that were just names, I've understood more, met interesting people, and largely I've had a fantastic time doing it. And I believe, and this is a quote that we could use at the end of every single podcast, life is just too short for excuses. From Wallace Shackleton in Kinross in Scotland, well, all over Europe, actually. I've included links to Wallace's work, and you'll see this adventure as part of those links, but you're absolutely right, Wallace. One of the most important life lessons I've personally gleaned from making this show for you, and you, yes, and the other listener, is that there are amazing people in this world who are happy to share their stories, happy to spend time with you, to stop and talk to you along the path as you go. And as we learned last week together, this really does start with one powerful word, as my guest Paul Choi last week made beautifully clear.
And it's not a complicated word.
Nope.
It's bringing down the barriers between them and us, going from where we are strangers standing on our own side of the fence to becoming a collective with a shared sense of community is as easy as saying hello. We need to say hello more. Everywhere I go, what I've discovered is the easiest way to engage in conversation, the easiest way to learn stories, the easiest way to learn about the cultures that I'm experiencing is to walk up to somebody and say hello. Everything else follows from there.
I'm aware just a moment ago I flippantly mentioned having a publicist. Of course I don't have a publicist. I'm just a little bit concerned for a moment. You were thinking, oh, Neil, you've changed, hey? No, the greatest publicists for this podcast are definitely, well, you and my other listener. I, of course, have some wonderful volunteers that help with the podcast. There goes the Pinstriped Express. Oh, no, it's not. That's carrying lots of, well, granite or whatever. Pups, this way. Come on. This way. We're going this way. Well, I'm going this way. What way are you going? I'm not going that way. Come on. Come. Come on. Look at that. Good boy. Let's go under the bridge. Yeah, I know. I still think I'm 5 when I go under a bridge, pups. You've got to make an echo noise, haven't you? Come on, before I start this letter, because it's a really, well, they're all important letters, but this is has its own level of importance, solemnity at times, perhaps even. Pups, let me give you a treat, because you have been very good. There we go. Don't put your nose in the tin. There we go. Another one, see if you can crunch really loudly, for sound effects' sake. Perfect. There you are. You've earned another one. Let's finish everything in the tin. This is one of the best, if not the best, certainly the cheapest, Christmas present I've had for many, many years. A tin that you can put treats in so they don't end up all in the bottom of the camera bag like they used to. End up with a smelly camera bag. I've actually had to throw one camera bag out because it it was infested with something. At the end of having all those dog treats at the bottom of the bag. Don't want to think about it. But so thank you if you are helping us spread the word of this podcast, which is really, really important. Without it, it just becomes a best kept secret. It really does. Right, let's get to that letter. Greetings from South Australia land. Long-time listener, first-time Patreon member here. Well, thank you very much for the support. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity to make you blush slightly as I compliment you on your thoroughly well-produced, informative and most importantly uplifting show. Quick, find me a sofa. I need to hide behind something, Glenn, and that's not false modesty. I have a slightly unique, it's an interesting word coming up, a slightly unique use for your show, and I thought you may be interested in hearing about it, and also a movie recommendation that I think matches the intent of your programme perfectly. Glenn, I am all ears. No hair, but all ears. I've been a police officer for 21 years and work as a crime scenes investigator, CSI. Yes, funnily enough, it is actually quite like the TV show in many respects, says Glenn, but also quite different. I'm also responsible for processing and documenting all manner of crime scenes, conducting DNA sampling, fingerprint examinations, blood stain pattern analysis, fire cause investigations, and of course investigating all manner of deaths and serious assaults. My word. A large portion of my work is also crime scene photography, in which I have the often confronting task of documenting in extreme detail these scenes with my camera. As you can imagine, over my 21 years in the force, I've seen and experienced just about everything, and recording these scenes with a camera can be, well, very surreal and sometimes an overwhelming experience. Having to work alone as we do only adds to the surreal nature of my work. As I'm sure you and your other listener can appreciate, this type of work can have a substantial effect on one's mental health over time. Dealing with and mentally processing such scenes and events can take a great toll over the years. And sadly, I've been close to several officers who found it all too much and taken that final step in recent years. Luckily for me, I've not been cursed with any mental health issues yet and thoroughly, truly do enjoy my job. However, I've also recently acquired a secret weapon that helps me on a day-to-day basis to cope with the stresses and strains of my job. Your podcast. I chuckled there, probably at the wrong moment, but I saw the words coming up. Okay, this is not time, Glenn, for false modesty and a British sense of humility. I will just say that I genuinely do feel privileged for your suggestion that a podcast can in any way, as you say, be your well-being or mental health secret weapon. I listened to your podcast in my CSI van while driving between scenes, each containing all manner of depravity. The sound of you, and sometimes Barney, walking through the woods, quietly making pictures, describing what you're seeing and speaking with other inspiring people brings me back to centre in the present moment and keeps my mind from wandering back to the uncomfortable things that I've seen. It truly gives me a sense of quiet, and the humour keeps me smiling and truly inspires me. Well, I'm glad you find some of it I'm not sure supposed to be humorous. I think we end up doing it not by default, but probably by mistake. Don't we, Barnes? Who at the moment, Glenn, is taking no notice of this incredibly powerful letter. He's got his nose firmly to the floor. I don't know what he's got, what scent he's picking up. If you were better trained, Barnes, you would be fantastic at the airports, sniffing out stuff. You'd be the cheese expert, wouldn't you? Outside my work, says Glenn, I'm also a semi-professional enthusiast photographer. Heavy on the enthusiast side, says Glenn, although there's a lot less blood, obviously, in my private work. I don't have a speciality as such. I enjoy all forms of photography, and I don't want to restrict myself to any certain form. However, I do find myself increasingly drawn to street photography, which is music to my ears this week, Glenn, because Valerie Jardin is here shortly with visual stories. You can find my work mainly on Instagram or my website, Light Theory Photography, which of course I will link to. The name comes from my thoughts on light being the most important element in all photography. I don't think you'll find many people that disagree with you on that front. I haven't managed to make my way through your entire podcast back catalogue, my word. That's a project in itself, Glenn. I've already established last week that there's no cure for that. Though I am working on it, so forgive me if this hasn't already been suggested, but I have an unusual recommendation for you and your other listener. I don't think you get a lot of non-documentary movie suggestions, but I think this one could match your show perfectly. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the 2013 edition, because there are various... Well, is there 2 films? Or 3? Well, there's the book, clearly. It stars Ben Stiller, and is equal parts heartwarming, inspirational and motivational, much like your podcast. And the best part of that has photography in a common theme or thread through the whole film. Without spoiling it, it revolves around an employee in the photographic department of Life magazine who leads a very dull life and suffers from vivid daydreams due to his lack of fulfillment. The story then follows him on an unexpected adventure to recover an important photograph. The music by Jose Gonzalez, it doesn't get much better than that, does it? Jose Gonzalez, there's a name, is fantastic. And some of the tracks will be perfect for the show. And the motto used by Life magazine in the film is indeed perfect for one of your final thought quotes. Thank you for your work with your podcast. It makes more of a difference than you know. And thank you for those really, really generous words and thoughts. And I don't really, Glenn, feel qualified to make a comment that will make any sense on how I feel right now, having read your letter. I feel like I'll fall over thank yous in, same style as somebody wearing shoes on the wrong feet, I think. But I do feel a sense of absolute privilege, I do, that you should write and share, Glenn Shepherd. I can almost hear my mum saying, See, there's somebody with a proper job paying your podcast a compliment. Make sure you say thank you properly. I will, Mum. I think I have. Next week on the Extra Mile, I'll be talking to Kate Cunningham, who talked with me about this podcast thing, as you have really, Glenn, being, it's not so much a podcast, it is a podcast, but it's sort of a kindness project. They weren't necessarily Kate's words, or indeed my own, but more something, a sort of description I think we arrived at together to make sense of what is quite a sort of rambling listen at times, particularly when I digress. But Glenn, I don't know what makes you do what you do, or how you do what you do, but thank you, whatever people believe in, looking into the sky, that you do, because you clearly have a skill and a calling and definitely a fortitude. And I'm proud as punch you're also one of our extra milers, which seems very lame as a thank you note. Sorry, Mum. Is that the best you could do, son? Yes, it is for the moment. And as much as it feels a little inappropriate to ask here, I would be fascinated to talk to you as a guest, actually, about your work. Maybe it's an extra mile conversation. Perhaps it is. Whilst, of course, respecting the day-to-day of what you photograph and what you see in your life. Anyway, I think I need a few bars of this music just to come to terms, really, with what you've shared. And I think I'll make a picture as well. Let's make a picture, Glenn. Back along the path. I haven't called it this for a while, a something and nothing, a sketchbook image. It's gone a bit blur, actually. We've not got sunshine today. We've got rain definitely on the way. 4/80th shutter speed, f5.6, ISO 160. There's a glint of light just kissing the end of the path here. So it's a kind of a shade making its way through to some light at the end of the canopy of the trees that are just overhanging us here. Here we go. I'll have a look at that when we get back. See what that looks like, pups. Come on. There's a terrific sense of humility for me. This is when I read your stories, because there's a great range, isn't there, from wonderful short stories about places that you've been to, postcards, if you will, from your walks with a camera. Sometimes just short, hello, I've been here. I thought you might like a picture, which I do always, right through to Glenn's sort of mail, where your day-to-day is a world's distance, actually geographically for some of us not living anywhere near Australia land. It is and was. Mentally too, I would say. I'm buoyed by this commonality, though, that commonality being the outdoors, the connection with nature, the camera, the trail. Sometimes, what did we say? Was that 3? Camera, 4? 4? I hope so. Sometimes all 4 at the same time. But for most, the camera's the glue, isn't it? That's what the title suggests, after all. And my guest this week, or the first of 2, of course, as it being the second Friday in the month, Valerie Jardin is here shortly for visual stories. But sandwiching her visit today is Jill Moon, who is a landscape photographer, a lover of the published picture and word, and someone who enjoys passing on her passions to others for photography and for a part of the country, or a county, called Suffolk. She does photograph across the UK, having said that, but we'll be concentrating upon her work for a good part of our chat in this county of Suffolk, and a location that's not known for its mountainesque vistas, that's for sure. Every part of the world has its famous flatlands. I did go look a few up. Great Plains west of the Mississippi, the 400 miles of the Nullarbor Plain in Australia. Do I even need to say the Netherlands? So here's Jill Moon, part 1 of our chat, a gentle conversation about being in a part of the world where you think differently about capturing the landscape. We'll be talking about the environment today. We'll be talking about teaching. We'll be talking about, very soon into our conversation as well, about how photography brings people together to celebrate the paths we take, even if they're not particularly or even at all into making pictures themselves. It's an invitation to walk now some paths this week in England to the east. Here's Jill Moon, part 1. Jill, I promised myself that I'll try to weave this question into a conversation more cleverly than I'm going to, but I think to tie everything in, I need to ask when looking through an eyepiece went from something you did casually to something that became, well, really such an important and integral part of your life.
I didn't start doing photography on a professional level till I came to Suffolk, which was about 15 years ago. And when I came here, I started a holiday business, and I bought a 100-year-old Dutch sailing barge, and I rented it out to holidaymakers on the Suffolk coast. Yes, it was a bit different and quite fun. I found that I needed a lot of photography for my business. Basically, I needed photos that would encourage people to come along. I needed landscape photos and photos that showed people what they could do on holiday. So that really got me going with the photography. I've always taken pictures, so it was always a love of mine, but that really kind of got me going. And because I was in the sort of weird sailing holiday world, I started to get people noticing my pictures. So tourist bodies in Suffolk started to notice my pictures, and I also got into the East Coast sailing scene as well. And I started photographing yachting events, and it kind of just grows. It's a self-fulfilling thing. Yeah. You meet people and you start get invited to do different things, and so it just grew and spiraled to where I am today.
There's a great amount of serendipity and all sorts of things like that attached to this business. Although I am bound to ask, I'm intrigued actually. I don't know what your job was before, but it's a bit of a left turn at the traffic lights in anybody's life to end up with a sailing barge that you turn into a business. Were yes. You interested in, it doesn't sound like you were necessarily interested in sailing before you bought this barge, or were you?
No, not really. I was always interested in running a holiday business. I was quite interested in that kind of thing. And I wanted to do something different. So something that wasn't the usual sort of cottage or, tents or something. And the opportunity presented itself, and I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. Yeah. And as a kid, I'd grown up with Swallows and Amazons and reading that as a child. Yeah, and I loved that that kind of adventure and the whole idea of getting outside and doing adventurous things. And so the barge was that way of having my little swallows and Amazons moment.
These are quite large, though, aren't they? Sailing barges. I'm thinking of them like like the Dutch barges.
Yeah, exactly like that. Yes.
So this has a sail on the top.
So it had a mast and it had lee boards, so the big sort of oval shaped things that act as like a keel. And so it looked very pretty.
Yeah, I mean, they are the sort of vessel you can take across to Europe, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Although I didn't.
I was speaking to somebody the other day who was telling me about somebody who took just a standard narrow boat across the channel, which I was horrified about. I was thinking, what? A narrow boat across the channel? Are you mad?
I don't think I'd want to do that. No. Not in a rough sea anyway. But I mean, Europe is well set up for narrow boats and sailing barges, isn't it? So lots of inland waterways and stuff. So,
but the boat that you had, I would imagine, was moored and it never moved. It was So
no, it did move. Did move. We did take people out for trips up and down the river, but essentially most of the time it was moored. Holidaymakers weren't allowed to take it out on their own.
No. What were you doing before then?
I started my life in a drawing office as a draftsman for a civil engineering company.
Right.
So totally different.
So was it an escape to the countryside then?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was about having a different life, doing something that wasn't the normal 9 to 5. Yeah. But it wasn't really an escape to the country. I've always lived in the country. The countryside's sort of in my blood. So I was born in Essex, spent a long time in Somerset, and then came to Suffolk from Somerset. Yeah, it was just about having a different life.
Well, you photograph in a beautiful part of the world I absolutely adore, photographically and emotionally. I know you live slightly further down the coast from the town of Southwold, but you spend a lot of time there. My dad has a plaque on the pier.
Oh, does he? Fantastic.
Well, it's an odd surprise every time I go and visit him, because this is a really strange thing. And I've had friends go there and they've said, look, I'll polish up Dad's plaque while I'm there. And I've said, that's fantastic if you wouldn't mind. They'll say, where is it? And I'll say, do you know, I have no idea. Every time I go, I have to look at all the plaques and all the messages and all the names before sometimes I find he's within half an hour. Sometimes it takes me an hour. It's just a really weird thing. I should know. Do I step left or right? It's a beautiful part of the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. There are a lot of lovely places, and sort of Southwold is probably one of the best known places on the Suffolk coast, isn't it? Along with Aldborough, maybe. But there are so many other smaller places that I really love to explore. Some of the sort of less well-known areas, I think, are lovely. Lots of wild and sort of big open skies, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it is wild at times as well. It's a very fresh breeze you get.
It can be. We get a lot of easterly winds.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. And Walberswick, I would imagine, is one of those lovely places that you're mentioning. Is the Clinker Boat ferry still there?
Yes, it is. Yes, I'm going across every day, pretty much. I think so. Yeah, every time you go down there, you see it. You see her rowing across. It's just part of that Southwold Walberswick holiday thing, isn't it? The ferry. It's lovely.
I seem to remember it was something like 10 or 20 pence at the most. What is it now?
Oh, I should think at least £3 or £4, but I don't know.
Oh, my word. Much of Suffolk, and certainly Norfolk, can be very flat, and we've talked of late about the fens, for example, but flat doesn't have to mean dull, does it? There's a lot more to photographic life than mountains.
Yes, absolutely. I found it difficult, perhaps, to start photographing in a flat landscape, because it is, I think, a bit more challenging than photographing in the mountains. You've got to look hard for your foreground and that kind of stuff, and look for your subjects, I think. But I really love exploring all the kind of flowers and all the little things that make up the natural world that I think I try to incorporate in my images. So try and make them a bit of a focus, so that gets over the flat part, if you like.
Did you find this organically developed as, you've been photographing now professionally for 15 years. When you first started photographing, I would imagine looking at a flat canvas was pretty tricky.
Yes, it was. And if I look back at my photographs from 15 years ago, I don't like them very much. I think my style has changed an awful lot in 15 years. I think I'm much more observant now, I would say. My pictures are much more about the wild parts of the landscape that I really like.
And what do you, when you're teaching people, because I will come on to the tuition that you do, what's your advice usually for when somebody looks out across flatlands? I know you've got the fauna before you, but what are you saying to them? What are you telling them to look for?
To really kind of, to spend some time and look and connect with the area that you're working in, really, and try and feel something for it. So, and I would also say when you're putting a composition together, look for something in the foreground that's going to complement whatever it is that is your subject matter. So, some foreground, some midground, some, and your subject, if you like. So if we were photographing Southwall Pier, for instance, there's some lovely rocks and things in the foreground, but then on some of the rocks there's some little limpets and things. You can have little elements like that can be part of your foreground that might not notice normally if you don't look hard. So some of the
small details leading to the larger landscape.
To the bigger things. Yeah, exactly.
We're going to talk about your books, but the one I want to start with is Planet Suffolk. I love this as a title, by the way. Love letters from a changing world. There's a serious nature behind its reason, over and above making, attractive pictures of the landscape. But it is a kind of planet in itself, as we've already identified. Who are the letters from?
Okay, so they were just from people that I came into contact with. Anybody that basically lived in Suffolk or who visited Suffolk on holiday, or anyone who had a connection with Suffolk, really. I wanted people to tell their personal stories about why they loved Suffolk and what it meant to them, and why they might be upset if we lost parts of it due to climate change.
And what sort of stories were you getting?
I got some lovely stories about people who had grown up in parts of Suffolk and who remembered Suffolk as it was a long time ago, or just people who loved a particular part, like a particular place or wildlife or something, who would go to a part of Suffolk and just watch the birds or watch the wildlife. Yeah. So, the Suffolk meant such a lot of different things to different people. It was lovely.
How did you pull these people together then? Because I wouldn't imagine they were all personal friends.
No, they're not. No, so I just put out an ad on Facebook or social media or somewhere like that. Did a bit of publicity in the local media, and these people just got in touch and wanted to take part.
What a fabulous way to get hold of people that weren't necessarily photographers or writers who were happy to share.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So did you have to pull together the writing then? Were you essentially a sub-editor?
Yeah, I really sort of edited the book. I've done my own little stories in there as well. So there's 36 different stories in this book, so I've done a couple, and the rest are done by members of the public. Yeah, and they've all written their words, and they've all put in either one or three photographs about what the place means to them.
So when they're photographing, they can take their pictures on anything, can they? Whether it's an iPhone or right? Okay, so you've been very inclusive in that respect. In fact, you're very inclusive when it comes generally to teaching and tuition of photography, aren't you?
Yes, I think so, because I think it's not about the camera, it's not about the equipment, it's about what you see and how you connect with the world and what's in front of you.
And what are the parts of Suffolk you pulled out? I'm interested to know because of course we're talking to, I would imagine, a great swathe of people who will never ever get to visit Suffolk because they live in all sorts of corners of the world. So you are kind of having to fill the gaps in here to an extent. I tried with the pier. I'm not sure if I managed. But what are the parts of this wonderful small county of England, the East, that you love?
Okay, so I wrote a bit about a place called Hoseley Marshes, which is an RSPB reserve just down the coast from where I live. And it was somewhere that I walked every day with my dog in the mornings. And I just wrote about the sort of daily changes of this place and how it changed through the seasons. And it's just somewhere that I've come to know really well. So it's a lovely bit of marshland, which leads down to the edge of the River Orr. And then across the river is the end of Orfordness Spit. It's just a lovely, quiet part of the world and full of wildlife.
It is an incredible coast for that, isn't it? Because you've got the RSPB reserves up and down that stretch of, and also actually right next to it, Sizewell B nuclear power plant.
Yes.
It's kind of interrupts the flow of things.
Yeah, it does. But I mean, Sizewell Beach is one of my favourite places to photograph. Actually, it's a fantastic beach. It's got it's got the nuclear power plant on one side, and then it's got some old Coast Guard cottages and some old fishing boats and sort of like the traditional fishing industry on the other side. And then in between, you've got all the lovely plants and things that make up the shingle and the sand dunes. And there's just so many contrasts. So, you know, photographing a bit of sea holly in front of the nuclear power station, and the colours are the same sort of colours, and it's just wonderful.
Well, there's a juxtaposition, I suppose, of the type of you've got nature next to this huge dome of Sizewell B, but the same sort of colours. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, I mean, it's not a pretty building, but because it's white and blue, and, you know, if you go there on a sunrise with the way the light hits it, you could almost think it was attractive if you've got some natural element in front of it. So it has its moments.
I agree with you. It's not the most attractive. I think you must be looking through wonderfully rose-tinted, squinted eyes to find anything attractive about that building. But you're right about putting things together that don't necessarily live in your mind in the same space. Which brings me neatly onto COP26, because I know the project was inspired by COP26. As a lover of nature, Jill, as a photographer in nature, what have you seen that's changed?
Oh, lots. I think it's very easy to get a bit depressed about it all, to be honest. But the landscape, I suppose, essentially stays the same. A lot of what I photograph, but things like the heath in Suffolk, we've got some wonderful heathlands here. And last year it was so dry that the heather didn't really flower. Most of it had died, or, you know, had got quite brown, and so no purple flowers, no carpet of purple last year. It was very sad to see. And also we had a few fires as well in the heathland, so I photographed some of the areas that had got burnt, so a lot of the burnt gorse and stuff. So all that sad. And then the wildlife that I like watching, you really notice a decline in the number of species that are sort of coming across. You know, the swallows and the swifts and those things used to be numerous, but not so common now. You just see it changing. And also the sea level rise as well on this part of the coast is another issue. So there are some places like Cove Hythe or places at Bordsey where the coastline is eroding quite a bit, and where they're having to put in sort of rock armour to try and protect it.
I often ask those contributors who I'm talking to about landscape and nature, and if part of their project work is within climate change, I often ask the question, is there hope? And I know you said it can be quite a depressive subject to talk about. Do you feel hope?
I think you have to, don't you? Because otherwise you'd just give up, wouldn't you? So yeah, and I think our role as photographers perhaps is trying to make people see what we might lose if we don't start changing the way we think about things. I think that was the idea behind my book, really, to try and get lots of people to tell stories about what they'd lose and what they love and what they'd hate to lose if climate change became a problem. I
suppose you have to be careful that nothing comes across as too preachy. That's the It's a really difficult balance, isn't it, to get right? And I think actually having people who are not necessarily photographers but just love the place is a really good way to do that and spread the message.
Yes, because all their stories were so personal, and they were all about different things that I wouldn't have thought about. So it was lovely.
The Suffolk coast, 25 walks with your camera. Very simple idea, and it came along with, I mean, I don't seem to associate many positive feelings or associations with the pandemic. Well, one thing it did do is it made us appreciate walking, didn't it, and being in the outdoors. And I know your website has a whole Photowalks tab, which was obviously a delight for me to see. Do you think your book and highlighting walks, do you think it's been a time where we've rekindled our connection with trekking?
Yeah, I think so. And I think going out with the camera, walking with the camera is just a great way to connect with the countryside and what's around you, because it makes you look at things more. If you're just going out for a walk, you tend to observe stuff, but you don't tend to notice it really well. Whereas if you go out for a walk with your camera, you might notice the flowers on the beach or the shells or birds in the trees or whatever. You notice different bits and pieces. So that was the idea behind the walking book, really, just to get people to explore different places and to get them to know them a bit better.
Well, I like this as well. Each walk has a photography scavenger hunt consisting of 10 words and stroke or items to photograph. They've been left deliberately vague, you say, to encourage creativity and to hone your observational skills. Now, I don't want you to give away too much here, because obviously I'd like people to go and buy the book. But can you give me an example of what sort of observational skills you are sharpening? What are you asking people to look for on these wonderful scavenger hunts?
Various different examples, things like texture or at your feet or things like that. Things that will encourage you to look for different things that you might not have normally looked for. And I think it encourages your creativity if you have a little prompt to go and look for something, because we might not photograph texture as a element on its own, but if we're given that prompt to go and do it, then we'll find different things that we wouldn't have normally seen. I just think it just helps. And I run these walks as like photo walks with a group of people as well. Have done in the past, I've done quite a lot of them now, and then we're all encouraged to share our photos in a little group afterwards. And it's amazing how many different images can be created from that one prompt, and they'll all be so different. It's really good, and I love seeing how different people see the world.
And Jill Moon returns for the second part of our conversation shortly. Just noticed some giant thistles. We've had a lot of rain of late, so vegetation is it's starting to lean now across the paths, and these giant thistle plants are doing just that. And moved by Jill and her suggestion of even sometimes in flat lands where you might not necessarily see something that feels inspiring as a vista, there's always detail in the foreground. Shutter speed 250th, f5.6, 160 ISO. Let's get a picture of the thistles. The dog's pulling me. Where are you going? Go on, look, there's your beach. Go on, in you go. Fantastic. Come on. Don't you dare shake next to me. Right. Have you been walking anywhere we should know about and see, as I mentioned a little while ago? It can be simple postcards of places you've been walking where you think, I know, I'd like to share this with the photo walkers. Somewhere where you walk. Then send them in, please. And stories, of course, sometimes short, sometimes long, to stories. I beg your pardon. I happen to be doing a link at the moment, as they say in podcast sphere. How rude, pups. How rude. Oh, it's another... this could last a while. It's one of those long freighties. Although, if I was in America land, one of those long freighties in your language, I mean, some of those can be, a kilometre and a half long? Or more? Is it a mile and a half? I know, see, there we go. It's already done. That's it. That's a long freight in our language. Where were we? Yes, send those in to stories@photowalk.show. 2,500 pixels wide, please, when it comes to resizing the images. Stories@photowalk.show. And we'll be hearing from you in the coming weeks. Right, feature roughly in the middle of the show. It's arrived at that moment. And, first up, the assignment. A reminder that this month it's set by Alice Tomlinson, who is looking for a triptych of pictures. It's a more challenging one in nature, I think, inspired by something that, you might have seen, but it's probably something that you've read. We need the words as well to go with it. You're making a story from that prose or text, your inspiration, and then you're making your three pictures in the triptych that should speak to each other and the story from what inspired you. Now, I know that sounds challenging. I know. But you've got a month to do this. I've already had a fabulous one in, very powerful one, actually, from Colin Mayer. And it'll be on the assignments tab on the website. So you can read all about it. And back to that sun talk from last week, so you can read about it. So it being the second Friday of the month, it's Street Photography Week in the middle of the show, and Valerie Jardin returns, this time to talk about the grab shot, which is more than a snap, as you're about to find out with Valerie Jardin. So the second of our visual stories, and I've actually given this another title this week to go on top of visual stories, and I've titled it, and you have to be a Harry Potter fan or know about Harry Potter to truly understand it, I've called it Spending Time with Muggles, because as photographers, sometimes we have to be pretty sharp making our pictures when we're spending time with Muggles, i.e. those who don't understand the magic of photography. And you've written a whole article about that. So can you remember it? It was 10 years ago.
Oh, yes. The article was about how to date a street photographer or something like that. Because I just know from experience that we're just impossible. I can't go anywhere without my camera. It's like my safety blanket, for a kid. But we're never focused. No. We're never focused on the person that's sitting in front of us because we're constantly scanning what's happening, whether it's at a fancy restaurant when you want to capture that moment of, your glass of wine in focus, and then the waiter dressed, the French waiter dressed in black and white walking by out of focus in this bistro or something, or anything else that could happen for that matter, going to a concert or anything. You always have your camera with you, so you're never really in the moment with the renowned photographer in your life.
Have you ever been at a table eating outdoors, so al fresco dining, and you've been sat there having a chat, and you've completely just left the conversation and actually physically left the conversation? Said, look, darling, I'll be back in a moment, but I've just seen something over there that looks just too good to miss.
Oh, and I don't even have time to say that. I just take off. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why, honestly, that's why I started workshops 12 years ago, because at least now if I'm having dinner with workshop participants, someone takes off. Nobody cares. We're all there for the same thing. So we all understand each other. Because I've put my family through that all the time. They don't even care anymore. They're like, oh, she disappeared. Oh, well, she'll find the car. Yeah. And, I think everybody can relate to that. So,
right. Yeah. Well, that's what today, this month's piece is about, really. It's grab shots. Although looking at them, I would never have described them as grab shots. So as always, the photos will be on the show page, so you can follow the conversation here and either check on them at the same time if you're not driving, or come back to them later on and you can check out the photographs that we were talking about. And the first one we're going to start with, I can't believe this is a summer shot for a start.
Yes, so that's really fresh because we were recording this on July 3rd and I shot this on July 2nd. So I literally just grabbed that shot yesterday morning from my campground. I was actually tent camping and on Lake Superior. So for those of you who know, kind of have the map of the U.S. in mind. We're kind of in the middle, right, and way on top by the Canadian border. And it's the north shore of Lake Superior, which is one of my happy places when I'm in the United States because it looks a lot like Brittany. And Lake Superior is so big that it's like an ocean. And so I was walking by and there was really, really heavy fog, which I see it often when I'm there and you see the fog rolling, but this was super thick. And as we were walking the dog and I had my camera on my shoulder, I was thinking, man, if just anyone could just come out of that fog, like on a kayak or even, on one of those boards that you stand on, anything. But I was thinking, well, who would go kayak in such deep, fog? Dense fog? Yeah. And at one point, we're going up the hill to the woods along the lake. And my son said, there's some kayakers. I just ran back down the hill, ran onto the pebble beach, and got there quick enough and in time before they actually reached the shore. So I grabbed this shot. One, they were a little bit further. One, they were a little bit closer. But I like that this shot, my middle shot, they're actually in sync. I like that they have the paddle up at the same time. And so I grabbed the shot, and instead of just catching up immediately with my family, I figured, oh, they'll probably, I'll catch up with them later. They'll keep on going. I waited for this couple to come to shore. and they happen to be brother and sister. And the gentleman who has the hat is from San Francisco, spends his summer on the North Shore of Lake Superior.
Yeah.
And so he knows a thing or two about fog, being from San Francisco. And so he came to shore, and I showed him the picture on the back of my camera. I said, "Oh, I really need to share this with you, because this is exactly the shot I envisioned minutes ago as I was walking by." And there, all of a sudden, it just appeared out of literally nowhere. And so I showed it to him, and I sent it to him this morning, and he was super happy.
Now,
So-
when you shoot, these are silhouettes against so with contre-jour, I think as well. That's what it feels like. I'm not sure.
Well, actually, you have to handle fog like you would snow. So actually, I'm overexposed by a full stop. Otherwise, it's super dark gray, right? So for the fog to really appear that misty, white, dreamy look, you have to overexpose, and here I was overexposed by one full stop, and but they're silhouetted because they're backlit. Yeah, I mean the sun was rising behind them at that point.
Yeah, I can see
so,
that.
So they are silhouetted. Yeah, there would have been no detail anyways. I mean, it was so thick, so thick. I mean, the camera was literally wet.
Now, second shot. Second shot. You've titled them, and this one's called Mr. Hulot. And why is it called that?
Do you know Les Vacances de Monsieur Hulot, the vacation of Mr. Hulot?
No, I don't. I should.
Anybody French will know what I'm talking about,
Right.
because he kind of looks like that.
Right.
And he's this kind of awkward, like Tati a little bit, this awkward, tall man, always with a hat. And this one was actually in Brittany last summer. Again, a grab shot during summer vacation. I started last year a series called Summer Vibes, which actually I have Summer Vibes 2022, and we can link to it. Summer Vibes 2023 started in June, because as photographers, when we're on vacation and we cannot take the time we really wish we could just to do our own photography, especially, I mean, for me, I have no excuse. That's what I do for a living. So during family time, I really, really try to be in the moment and not say, "Oh, I'll be waiting here for 30 minutes, I'll catch up." I rarely do that. Sometimes I can't resist, but most of the time they're grab shots. So instead of the frustration, I find that if you take it as a challenge and see how many good shots can I have at the end of my vacation by only taking grab shots, especially in street photography. Yeah. Sometimes you see something you have to compose and then wait for the perfect subject to walk through your frame. Well, there is going to be none of that usually. So it's going to be like moments that catch your eye, just like here. So, those beach cabins that people rent, and they rent them for the day or half a day. And then they usually come with the beach chairs, and then you're completely sheltered from the sun and the wind. So they're usually stripy, which is very beachy. I like the stripes. So they were open, and these are in Dinard in Brittany. It's a beautiful little cove, the beach. I was walking with my family. We were looking for toilets, actually. I was walking
romantic
with my family on the little boardwalk.
Yeah.
And of course, I have my camera on my shoulder, and I'm always scanning. That's how I fall into holes and such, or stumble on things. But I saw this gentleman, really interesting, not dressed, kind of dressed for the beach, but in a very, very conservative way.
Yeah, very.
And he's looking, he has his hand on his hip, and he's just scanning the horizon. And instead of getting around the beach cabins, I figured, hey, there is the opportunity for a creative framing. And I framed him between those big, and they're really big in the frame, those stripes. And he's framed right there. And to me, he looked like Monsieur Hulot in Les Vacances de Monsieur Hulot. And again, we'll have to put a link. And so that was kind of a movie moment for me. But again, a grab shot, and then we found the toilets at the end of the beach.
I'm glad you found those. You are renowned, I think, in my mind, or in my eye at least, as making pictures where you shoot over shoulders, through things, by things. And often there's a sort of a larger person in foreground that carries you right the way through the picture to the background. This is another occasion, I think, because we're looking between two beach tents, as I would call them beach huts, yeah. But are they because have you pressed yourself up against these to make them loom large in the picture? Are they actually a little bit smaller in real life than they appear in the picture? Because you're very good at doing that.
I shoot at 23 millimeter, which is 35 equivalent, so I'm going to have that consistent look. No, I got pretty close, obviously, but I want them to be big. It's going a little bit against what people expect, and that's what you want. You want people to react. And so if everything is always framed in the thirds and blah, blah, blah, it gets kind of boring. So creative framing, creative focusing, anything you can add to your composition quickly that's going to spice things up a little bit is all positive. So I really like, actually, this is part of an exhibit that's going on in Minneapolis. We just had the grand opening last week called Un Weekend à la Mer, a weekend by the sea. And that one is part of that exhibit. And people have loved it. They really made them smile. There's some humor to it.
There's art in a grab shot, isn't there? I mean, I think when we think of grab shots, we think snapshot, grab shot, snapshot, which seems like a very careless occupation, but it's not. There is art, isn't there, in the grab shot?
There is always intent.
Yeah.
I mean, intent has to be there no matter if you have an hour or a fraction of a second. And all the decisions are made in camera. None of these were really cropped, actually. The kayakers a little bit, but none of these pictures were cropped. I mean, this is really about composing and making the decisions in a fraction of a second in camera, which to me is so important. I'm a little bit of a purist for that, but the decision of color black and white was also made before I pressed the shutter. All these were shot in black and white. So I find that those are decisions that are going to make you a stronger visual storyteller. Every decision you make in post-processing is ultimately not going to make you a stronger photographer. You're only going to become a better photographer if you make decisions before you press the shutter. So it's really about intent. And it doesn't matter how much time you have. The intent should always be there. You'll miss some, but at least you see.
Can you teach the grab?
Yeah, people always tell me, oh, I just missed that. I said, well, first, you didn't miss it. You saw it, which is the first step. Then, yes, it takes a lot of practice to be able to just grab the shot. So first of all, you need to let the camera do a lot of the work for you so that you can respond in that fraction of a second. So it's about vision at that point. That's why the camera should become an extension of your vision, should not get in the way. I think people are really bogged down by the technical aspect of things, and they waste time, and you don't have time. When there is a moment like that, you just don't have time. So find a setting that works, and then you just have to dial I'm usually in aperture priority. So I have that dial on my lens and I just turn it. I don't even have to look at it. I know exactly what I need to do, or dial my exposure compensation up and down. That's really all I need to do during the day. Really get settings that work for you, and some that are quick. I mean, of course, if you need to go into a menu, it is not happening. Buttons and dials. That's what a good camera should be.
I think there's courage involved. You have to have courage in a grab shot, don't you?
You have to be quite bold, I mean, depending how close you get, but always with respect. So never, even especially humor and street photography, in my opinion, should always be respectful and not making fun. And so that's where I draw the line. That said, there are plenty of photographers who are very successful with taking photographs of people on the beach that are borderline, in my opinion. But to me, you have to imagine, okay, if that's someone that you know, or if it was you, how would you feel about that picture being posted?
Yes.
And I see a lot of pictures, I would be mortified, or if it was my mother or my father or whoever on that picture, I would be mortified that that picture would be in public. I'm very careful with that. So I think subtle humor is much more difficult to capture too than making fun of someone. I think that's always easier. So I've taken my fair share of pictures of people in situation of ridicule, but I've never really posted those because of that. Yeah.
And Valerie Jardin is back for part 2 of Visual Stories. Not here though. In this week's Extra Mile edition, which is available now, we'll continue with 2 more of her photographs. Her thoughts about how they were made, with more tricks and hints for grab shot shooting. Say that quickly. It's almost a tongue twister. Just a by the by, but all that talk of the fog over Lake Superior had me go, oh, Pups, don't do that. He's in the mud now. Look at you. Look at you. You look like you're wearing boots. Honestly, all that talk of the fog over Lake Superior had me go search for more information on the place. I know Lake Superior is one of the Great Lakes, yes, but I've not visited Superior. I know how vast it is. I know it has incredible depths, and I now know from having put the words fog and Lake Superior into my search that the Great Lakes have claimed 6,000 sailing ships in their time. I had to read that figure several times just to make sure that there weren't too many zeros there. But yes, 6,000 sailing ships in their time, making Superior and others the place, as you can imagine, for many a maritime ghost story. For instance, and I shall link to Michigan's Gander newsroom for the other 4 stories from which this comes, but on an August night in 1892, Benjamin Trudell woke from a sound sleep. He had had a nightmare, one that, as a ship's captain, proved particularly worrisome for him. Trudell had dreamt that the Western Reserve, which was a steamer built in Cleveland, had sunk in the depths of Lake Superior. And it was true. The Western Reserve, sailing across Lake Superior with its owner, Peter Minch, aboard, it sank when its mast collapsed onto the deck, slipping beneath the dark Lake Superior seas about 60 miles offshore, taking with it 26 of its 27 occupants. Some say they still see the reserve sailing the seas of Lake Superior to this day. According to reports, voices and laughter can be heard when the ship is in sight on the largest of the Great Lakes. I think I'd like to do a Ghost Stories podcast. I've mentioned this before, I know, a sort of short series, maybe 6 at a time. The one I keep talking to you about, well, and with Mally about, Mally of the Trees. I've said we should go sit ourselves in some of the most haunted places and swap ghoulish stories and try and make some photo stories. We've talked about it before, I know. Maybe after a series of Mally's Trees on the 4th Friday of each month, we should swap it out for a short series of ghost stories and try and shoehorn photography into there somehow. Try it on for size. Take our one-man tents and go on wild camp in haunted places. Sort of a sort of audio version of sitting around a campfire shining a torch into our faces. 2 grown men trying to scare each other witless. See which one of us breaks first and checks into the local travel lodge. My money would be on Mally. Sorry, Mally, but my money's on you first. I'm going. That's it. I've had enough. I'm off to the travel lodge. Anyway, street photography. Just to return to Valerie for a moment. That's where we were. I had a really interesting letter last month about street photography, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. First up, though, Africa. I am very excited about the retreat in West Africa coming up to the Gambia. We still have some places. We're off together for a photo. Well, it's a photo holiday, a photo retreat, a photo expedition. It's many things, all in one exciting adventure to the smiling coast of Africa, known for its warm welcome, where we'll be spending time with the people of this wonderful small country on the west coast. We'll be doing river trips and going to markets, wildlife, plenty of wildlife to see and photograph, villages. There's music, there's making documentary projects, experiencing the food of the region. It wouldn't be an adventure without experiencing the food. I love the food of the Gambia. It's a 10-day photo trip, guided by 3 experienced photographers. One of them more a film producer than a photographer, but the photographers include Jason Florio, who spoke to me earlier this week via Zoom, actually. We recorded some thoughts about the country, which I'm going to be playing back over the months to come before we depart. Jason Florio, one of our guides on this incredible trip. Tell me about the markets. I love the markets. For me, that yielded probably some of my favourite photographs from the visits I've made to the Gambia. I use this phrase such a lot, and I'm not going to make an excuse for using it again. But you see the whole of the country, the whole of Gambia in one market quite often, don't you?
Yeah, the markets for sure are. I mean, the word vibrant seems sort of lacking, whereas they are sort of incredible places. And, as talking of sound, the sort of cacophony of the market traders, the buyers, the bleating of sheep, the color obviously is exceptional there. I mean, everyone is, especially all the vendors are often females, so beautifully attired in their wax print fabrics. And there's such a sort of a mixture. There's obviously all your kind of daily buys, your fruit and your veg, and fish. But there's also just the household stuff as well. And it's just amazing what sort of things you can find. And I love some of the more offbeat shops which are selling potions and remedies of all sorts. It's an endless dive, I think, into the markets. There's always something around one corner or another, and it's great just to chat to people there as well. I mean, I love often before even taking pictures, we're sort of have a good chat, buy a couple of bits and pieces, and just sort of I feel like you float through the market. You're almost like sort of carried on a wave of people. So it's just great. You've got to be open-minded and just let yourself get lost. I think that's the kind of the beauty of those places. And I've been to probably most of the major markets in Gambia with Helen, and there's always something new there that you find. There's another little shop hidden away, some other little gem selling some amazing fabrics, which Helen somehow conveniently gravitates towards.
Jason Florio. And if you would like to be on our Africa Expedition 24, hang on, there's a wonderful reflection here. I'll come back to that in a second. Hold on. Stay with this thought. Barney, don't move on too far. There's these wonderful reflections going on in front of me of the... what are they called? Great big large leaves that dip themselves into the river. Neil, don't you know? Well, unfortunately, I can't check on the app at the moment because I am using the phone's microphone to record this. I will get a picture. I'll look it up. It'll be one of my something and nothing sketchbook images. Shutter speed 220, 5.6, blur... hang on, don't peek early. A blur sky today. It's a bit featureless. 160 ISO. There we go. We're going to be sailing along this river. Sailing, I use in a loose term, of course. We're bringing a barge along it in 3-4 weeks' time, I think. I've planned for, how long have we been doing the Photowalk? I think we've been doing a version of the Photowalk. I know that originally the podcast was Photography Daily, but we've been doing a version of it for probably nearly the entire run, certainly 2.5 years. And in that time, I've been twice up this river in a barge, and twice I've considered making a podcast, and twice I've failed. Let's try and make it third time lucky, shall we? Anyway, where were we? Oh, yes. Thank you to Jason for talking to me about the Gambia. Very, very much looking forward to it. And we'll play some more pieces in about his thoughts about this fantastic country in the coming months. We were on the subject of street with Valerie a moment ago, weren't we? Something here from a long-term supporter of the show that I thought you'd be interested in. It's a letter from an extra miler, Christopher Parsons, PhD. And in terms of that letter, this week on the show page, A first. I am publishing Chris's letter to the show page, episode 389, instead of reading it in full here. And that's because I think this is I wasn't sure actually whether it could be one of our photo essays, but I thought, no, I'm going to use it as a reference piece, and maybe it will be on that essays tab at some stage, I'm not quite sure, but it's a reference piece here on the show page today, because I think it's really important. It's something particularly thorough, which I would expect no less from Chris. It's a detailed, well-considered well, I suppose you could say, let's use the T word, technical word. You'll get a nosebleed, Neil. A technical letter in terms of ethics, in terms of thought, and certainly in terms of a conversation starter. Broadly speaking, and this is where, Chris, we get to find out if I can listen properly in class, it's about the legalities and the conversation about and of showing faces in street pictures, and the history of, too. Making people identifiable is broadly what this is about, and the problems that seemingly is starting to cause. It's about how historically we started on a plane of actually a lot of blurry pictures when you couldn't properly see folk. And there are some very, very famous images where that example is, I was going to say the word clear, if that's not talking too much at cross purposes. But it's a letter about how AI is and can now recreate street scenes, and possibly do that as it advances with our faces. That's you, that's me, possibly inserted into pictures and places we've never been, because AI has effectively scraped publicly available images. Sounds frightening. Actually, that's the only bit where I've had to be a little bit cautious. And Chris, and I've slightly edited your sentence. What, Neil? Because the row with a very large organisation is something I wouldn't want to be an ensuing scenario. Although I think it's well documented that this... let me not bury myself with a paragraph, having said I don't want to do that. But I've linked to an article about the company and the situation in question, and I'm very thankful, Chris, that you brought this up, because I had absolutely no idea that this event that you mention within your letter, and that I've linked to with a slightly more thorough article. Well, actually, you can look up loads. I think I picked one for the New York Times, he says, from memory. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. I suppose this all started for me, this conversation about hiding faces in street pictures to observe the new privacy laws in parts of Europe in particular, when Alex Fredriksson, who's a very important member of our community, one of our listeners, one of our extra milers at times, told me about Austria, where she lives, as it being a place where no longer can you just go out and make a street picture because you should so feel like it, because you can't identify strangers in that picture without their explicit permission. We certainly can't publish them. Imagine a street with a wonderful scene. There's, say, I don't know, let's put, it's quite noisy here, sorry, we're next to one of the fantastic locks along the river. I'll be struggling with this one in 3 or 4 weeks' time. Right, come on, this way, pups. He's finding stuff to roll in. Don't do that. Yes, imagine a scene, 20 people in your Austrian scene. Fantastic street scene, and you think, look at this. This is going to make a super, super street picture for my Instagram. So there's the scenario. Are you going to go and ask all of those 20 people in that street that are identifiable in your picture, are you going to go and ask every single one for their permission? In a country where, as Alex says, people are very, very, well, they're super hyper conscious about their right to privacy, and they take that right to an nth degree. When even, it's very arguable that the picture is a wonderful historic record of their time and their place on this planet, but they're very likely to say no. How many of those 20 do you think will say no? I reckon Alex would say over half, because in Austria in particular, this gets drummed in, this right to privacy. And that can be a good thing, but photographically, is it a good thing for street photography, for history, for documenting this world? I did a quick search on the web. Can I take photos of strangers in Europe? The answer is generally yes, with a caveat, and I quote, in other parts of the world, including most of Europe, it's fine to take photos in public places without consent, but it's not legal to publish them. Other places, such as Spain, Switzerland, and Brazil, require consent to be obtained before you even take pictures in public. And this is the bit that troubles me, because whilst there's a moral responsibility, I think, to make pictures that don't directly hurt somebody or abuse them, perhaps by, the perfect example is plastering pictures of homeless people on your Instagrid, because it might be the sort of genre that gets lots of likes. I think that can be just abuse of your privilege of making a photograph on the street. Although, and I know there's a counter argument, that it's important to see those sorts of pictures in reality. Otherwise, our glorious leaders can relish the idea that social problems on their watch go unreported, and that would be a bad thing. If we don't have street pictures showing us our world, though, it's like this period of history didn't happen in some parts of the world. I mean, you'll have lots of intentional camera movement pictures, granted, but a sort of left field thought here. You imagine the aliens who come to visit looking for postcards of the 2020s and beyond, taking home pictures of a blurry world with nothing in focus. Oh, let's not settle on that planet. Varg. I don't know why Varg is the first name I should think of as a typical alien name, but let's not settle on that planet, Varg. Everything's a blur. We're going to have constant ET headaches. So it's a really, really well-written piece that takes on board some solid thoughts and arguments about the identifiable face, AI, and far more. And that's why I really wanted you to read the whole thing and for it to be a point of reference, because I think it is. I do want to read a couple of paragraphs from Chris, though, so you get a flavour of the piece. Then I am passing you the baton for the more technical parts. As a street photographer, says Chris, I always try to include people in my images and typically aim to get at least some nose and chin. No shade to people who take images of people's backs, and I do this too, but I think that capturing some of the face's profile can really bring many street photographs to life. But street photography can include a lot more than just the people. And the history of street photography and the photos we often praise as masterpieces showcase that blurred subjects can generate interesting and exciting and historically significant images. And you're right, I think. No, I know. So thank you, Chris. Thank you for the first that we now have. Thank you for the letter. And thank you in any advance, and my other listener, for any thoughts that you may leave in the comments on the show page after you've read it, because I know this is a subject that's going to continue. They're very, very, very much in the background, so you're probably not going to hear them. But I've noticed of late, we're a fair way, well, for England land anyway, inland, and there's a lot of gulls. Sometimes, the other morning, I closed the window at about 5:30 in the morning because the gulls outside our house, it was like I was staying in Frinton-on-Sea. Is there a Frinton-on-Sea? Insert famous place next to sea here. It's wonderful to hear, and it does make me, I want to one day, it's my dream, it's my absolute dream to live by the coast. It really is. I love it. Can you imagine the photo walks? Will you still be doing the show then, Neil? Do you know what? I hope I am. Yes. With your support, yes, I hope I am. I definitely love recording this. If this is what I could do in my time all the time, don't start, Neil. All right, move on. Okay. Right, where were we? Oh yes, quick one from Steve Shreve. Then back to today's guest, Jill Moon. Hi Neil, here is a recent analog, in brackets, project that I've been tinkering with over the last couple of weeks. I work in front of a computer screen all day on design projects. In addition to that, I've been helping a friend launch his portfolio, i.e. more screen time, and trying to launch my personal website and blog, IIE, more screen time still. Safe to say, a lot of screen time there, Steve. Earlier in the year, I saw some cool tech art of disassembled electronics and some old film cameras on Etsy of all places. Actually, Etsy's the perfect place to find this kind of thing, isn't it? Then I read a blog post of a photographer's teardown of a saltwater ruined X100. From that point, I had it in my little mind to create a piece of art for my office stroke studio from a broken X100. Blimey, Steve. You won't find many of those online, surely. They've all become real collector's items because of TikTokers, haven't they? A few weeks ago, says Steve, I won my eBay auction for an X100. Okay, Steve, within a sentence, my case has completely fallen apart. I started meticulously disassembling the device, although I had to order a set of Japanese spec'd Phillips screwdrivers. Blimey, you were seeing this project through properly. JIT-001 and JIT-001. Not from Japan, but from the iFixit website. Thank you for the information. Just in case I should think about taking mine apart. There's a fine balance as to how far to disassemble the item. For instance, says Steve, I initially removed the dials and hot shoe from the top plate, but reattached them for the final display. I left the buttons on the back panel. Finally, I laid out the parts into a square pattern that I would be using for my 19 by 19 inch shadow box frame. With double-sided tape, super glue and lots of patience, I transferred the items onto the mat board, using a ruler on each side to maintain a consistent 2.5 inch margin. Before the details get any more boring, says Steve, his words, not mine, here's some photos, which I will pop onto the show page today. See? Wall art from a camera. That only a couple of months ago, I maintain you would not have found quite so easily, Steve. I'll maintain that one thanks to a TikToker saying how awesome these X100s were, while making a picture of a blueberry muffin and dancing to the latest, I don't know, insert latest big TikTok tune here, spelt CHOON without a full stop at the end of the sentence. I can see my kids face planting, although there's no way they're going to be listening to this by now. They'll have tuned out. Even if they tuned in, by now they'd have tuned out. Right. Are we ready for... I'll put that... Did I say this? That picture definitely is on the show page today. Should probably put that on the Instagram as well, shouldn't I? I think that would be really interesting. Note to self, pop it on Instagram too, if Steve should agree. Right. Are you ready for part 2 of my conversation with Jill Moon, landscape photographer, author, mentor? Yes, Neil, I thought you'd never ask. Well, here we go then, part 2 of my chat with Jill Moon. At the Edge of Permanence is a wonderful study of nature and its constant state of flow. I guess we tend to think of, I do think of nature in seasons and the landscape that can take hundreds of thousands of years to visibly change, notwithstanding, of course, global warming and those sort of problems we were talking about a moment ago. But this particular book is about how nature is constantly on the move and changes within hours. Let alone days. And I love it. Tell me more, because it's not a book that was photographed across years and years, and that's another thing that I particularly like about it.
Yeah, so it was photographed across a week. So it's about an area in the northwest Highlands of Scotland, just north of Ullapool in Assynt, and there's a geopark up there. They've got some of the oldest rocks in Britain, I think, 3 billion years old, I think. And so I was fascinated with that. And then it got me thinking about the things that change on a daily basis against the sort of landscape that's seemingly permanent because it's been here for so long. So I thought about the coast, and I thought about the tides, and I thought about how the light changed and how sort of nature changed and that kind of thing. And that became the basis for a lot of the pictures in the book. So the sort of the life in the liminal zones, if you like, the zones that change all the time, set against a backdrop of almost permanent geology, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, those rocks are not going to change for another 3 million years.
No.
But the landscape changing within it is incredible. And that's what fascinated me so much. I thought, what a fantastic idea. Did you have that idea? Did you go there with that idea? Or did you go to that part of the beautiful world thinking, I wonder what I'll find?
No, I definitely went with a plan. I had the idea before I went. I'd been to that part of the world several times, and it's a part of the world that I loved photographing. So I knew what the landscape was like and what was there. And I just wanted to explore that idea about the difference between the things that are so transient and the thing that was permanent. And so I was looking for those zones, like the intertidal zone and the sort of areas around the locks and the way the water moves and the way the light changes and all those bits. So that became part of my image making, set against the more permanent landscape.
Listening to you talk about some of the places you visit, I would imagine it's had a huge well-being effect to you across the years. What have you seen about yourself change? I mean, I know over the last 3 years of photographing, I'd not really thought about the paths that I tread, much more beyond, is it a good route to the pub? But I'm being slightly flippant, to be honest, but I know that I've changed a lot in 3 years and how I view the landscapes I walk within.
Yeah, I mean, I've changed loads since I've started to do photography. I was very quiet, very shy. I've always loved nature, so that part hasn't changed. So the love of being out in the landscape hasn't changed, but just me personally has changed quite a lot. But I guess the way I see the world has changed a bit too. So I'm much more connected, I think, to the areas that I work in now than perhaps I was before. So even though I loved being out in them, perhaps I wasn't so connected to them in the way that I am now, and I care about what happens to them.
Has it changed things like the way you travel, the way you think about your association with the world in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I don't fly now. And that's a sort of deliberate choice because I don't want to add to my carbon footprint, if you like. There's so much on my doorstep that I can photograph. I mean, a lot of my work is done in Suffolk, and I never get bored of going out. Even if I go to the same places, I can always find something different.
On some of your workshops, the piecing together of a book is actually part of the whole process, as in understanding how the pictures can coexist, which I thought was a really interesting way of running a workshop, actually, because there's a tactile nature to it. We've already discovered, of course, you love books. That it's a really refreshing way to teach photography, isn't it? For people to understand, well, how are these images going to live next to each other, side by side, become diptychs or triptychs?
Yes, yeah, because I think a lot of people go out and we're so focused on the individual shots, getting a kind of killer image and all that kind of stuff, and we're just focused on that one shot. But I think it's really nice for people to think in series of shots and think about how you could tell a different story with 3 shots instead of 1 shot, or with a series of shots instead of 1 shot. And it really does open people's eyes, I think, to sort of what's around and how to go about it when they have to come to put together 10 shots together for a little kind of mini project. It's quite a challenging thing to do, actually, to think about it, to photograph it, and then to put it all together.
Yeah, when you break it down, though, I mean, your approach to it reminds me of a photographer I met on a walk a few years ago. I didn't ask his name. I wish I had. He was making pictures of Donington Castle, which is right on my doorstep. But he wasn't just photographing the castle. I mean, the castle is quite an interesting thing to photograph anyway. What left of it there is. But he was photographing the lichen, and he was photographing flowers growing out of the rock, and talking to him. And you very much remind me of him in that respect. He would say, "Well, yeah, but this is what's happening with nature on my," as he called it, on my castle.
Yeah, because I think that all adds to the story, doesn't it?
It does.
So I think all those bits are fascinating. I
don't think I ever truly appreciated as well how everything in the woods is talking to each other. You love woodland photography. I'm only just beginning to discover the magic of it. What is it for you about being in woodland that you found is magical, that you particularly enjoy to photograph?
I just think the woods are a really sort of therapeutic place to be. They are so calming. You go in there and you just feel instantly relaxed being in a woodland habitat, I think. And I just love they're very complex environments, aren't they? And I love the challenge of trying to simplify that complexity into something that makes a nice photograph.
Well, Mally, who talks on this program occasionally about trees, so Mally of Trees, as I call him, he says there's absolute chaos in the trees, and trying to make sense of that chaos. I think a couple of years ago, if somebody would have said that to me, I'd have thought, what mushrooms have you been eating on the floor? But I get it, because they are chaotic by nature. Nothing is symmetrical. And for somebody who loves symmetry, I found, first of all, I was thinking, right, how does this work as a photograph? But nothing is. And you don't make pictures that necessarily feature a whole tree. You simplify it a lot, don't you?
Yeah, I quite like the smaller scenes as well. There's a lovely piece of woodland just down the road from me, really ancient piece of oak wood, and it's got some 500-year-old oaks in it, but it's also got some of the tallest holly trees in Britain. And just that combination, that contrast between the hollies and the oaks is something that I find really fascinating to photograph. And I just love the idea that these trees have been there for so long. You know, they've seen such a changing world around them, haven't they?
Well, there was a whole book project you did about that oak woodland, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, there was. Yes. Yeah, called Rooted. And I split the book up into 5 sections, which sort of about time and nature and spirituality and conflict. And they were all things that could apply to the human psyche, if you like. But I applied it to trees and how the trees kind of interacted together and how they formed communities, if you like, how it was the woodland was a community. And I tried to draw on the story that I told was the story of the oaks and the hollies. Essentially, the oaks have been there a lot longer, but the hollies are growing faster. And basically, they're killing the oaks because they're cutting out their light. So I wanted to tell this story of how these two trees have kind of lived together, but ultimately the oak wood is dying and the hollies are taking over. And so that's essentially the story behind the book,
Good
if you
Lord.
like.
I mean, underneath the ground, all these sort of super highways of messages that are being exchanged between trees. I think it's interesting you mentioned the word conflict, because the trees can either help each other, they can offer a hand of friendship with regard providing nutrients, or they can take it away. And I wonder whether that's going on under the surface with the hollies.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there has been science that says that trees can nurture their young through communication through their roots, so which I find fascinating. And you don't think that when you're just wandering through a woodland, do you? But there's so much that's going on underground that perhaps we don't understand.
There's more in the understory than the story that you think. I think
absolutely.
Is what I heard. Did you ever think, by the way, that, and I did spy this on your biog, and I must go and watch the whole thing. I'm going to be very honest with you and say I haven't signed up to Channel 5 yet, so I'm going to have to sign up to watch it. But I spied this very last minute before we spoke, and so I didn't have the chance to see it. So I'm not going to pretend I did. But it must have been fabulous. Did you ever think you'd be appearing on Channel 5 with Kate Humble, making a programme on a walk?
No, I didn't. No.
How did that come about?
I was just contacted by Channel 5. I guess they wanted a photographer in Suffolk. Kate was going to be in Walberswick on part of her walk, and that's where I met her. And we did a little bit of photography. And Kate only had her mobile phone, so that's what we used. But essentially, we talked about composition and seeing a photograph and what it was about Suffolk Coast that I liked.
One thing we haven't talked about here, you did mention it right at the start, is, it's become a love of sailing now, which, like your love of nature, is another opportunity to mix two real passions, isn't it? This time, sailing and photography.
I started off covering a lot of sailing events on the East Coast. So there are some classic sailing events on the East Coast with lots of the old boats. Yeah. And there are also some Thames barge races on the East Coast with the lovely old big barges with the big red sails. So I liked covering those kind of events where you've got the classic sailing vessels. And I used to get out on the water and go around and photograph all these things. Some of the images that I've taken were for magazines, so I got into meeting a few different people and used to provide pictures for different sailing magazines.
Was this all serendipity again then? Something that sort of organically happened? Because you weren't doing sailing photography when you picked up a camera 15 years ago.
No, it's just people I met, and you meet people, don't you, and chat, and things happen, and you know, I met a number of people who were connected to different sailing magazines. Yeah. That's kind of where that started, really.
But it's quite a closed, I always thought sailing was quite a closed network, having worked many years ago for a radio station that was involved in a sailing event in Cowes on the Isle of Wight. It was such a close community. that you could only get so close, but it seems that you've managed to become part of the inner circle.
But really only on the East Coast, I think. So maybe there weren't so many people wanting to photograph things on the East Coast. I mean, South Coast, there's lots of people, aren't there? And lots of different sailing events. So maybe it's just location, really, more than anything else. But
I think you do yourself a disservice there, because the pictures are fantastic, and it's obviously something you enjoy doing.
Yeah, I don't do it quite as much now as I used to, the sailing photography, but given the opportunity, I would. Yeah.
I think you're the perfect photographer to ask this question that has formed the and finally for many an interview this year. It's a three letter word, and I ask people, what is your why? So in other words, what makes you get out there with a camera? What is it that draws you to photography?
I think that I love being outside. I love being in nature, and I want to tell people what I've seen, and photography is the best way of doing that. I want to show people that the world out there is beautiful and amazing, and for me, photography is the best way that I can do that, I think.
And my thanks to Jill Moon for her time. It was a joy to talk with her about her work and her books. I'll leave lots of links, of course, to Jill's website today, the various parts of, and it was fantastic. A lovely surprise, actually, to hear that Jill's a listener already to this program. So when I contacted her, it was like, yeah, I already listened to you. It'd be fantastic to have a chat. So that was a double treat, Jill. It really was. Today's show page for episode 389 is on our website live now on photowalk.show, he says, with loads of gravitas. It's got lots of links, some films possibly, I think, to and about the stuff of life that we've shared today, including the letter that I read from Christopher Parsons just a moment ago. Well, I didn't read the letter, actually, but I read some bits from it. We've entered the topic again, and I wanted that to be a fantastic reference piece, which I believe it is, on the show page today. So I really genuinely do look forward to some thoughts from what Chris has so carefully composed. There is, of course, a link on your podcast player app. I say, of course, it's not necessarily, of course, you might not have noticed it before, but there is there, look, on the app, that will connect you to the show page seamlessly. So it will. I had a note this week from Martin Finn, Martin with a Y, who pointed me toward the British Podcast Awards, and I nearly didn't mention this because, A, I feel like an awkward cross-legged Englishman looking like he desperately needs a bathroom, dancing on his pegs asking for votes. And in that I swerved it so well last year, when I thought we'd buried the idea, it is, after all, public knowledge that the only sorts of podcasts that win this sort of thing usually have a suggestion of or in the title, and so they're so trendy as makes no odds. We are not necessarily in that brigade. But Martin, with a Y, you mentioned it. You even underlined the words, at least invite people who might like to vote within your mail. So I will put a link to the Podcast Awards, the British Podcast Awards, on the show page today. Make of that as you will. I've not promised Barney that we have a chance, have I, Barnes? But if we do, by some miracle, actually get shortlisted, it's not going to happen. But if we do, I will take Barney to bark in angry tones when we come second to a podcast with shag or fuck suggested in the title. Martin, consider that checked off. Done. The Extra Mile is out now. This week, Valerie Jardin has the second part of Visual Stories. My thanks to those who volunteer their help here. Neil Ford attends to the IT of my life. And by extension yours as well, with the podcast here. Saves me from rebooting kit with a hammer. Andrea Gilpin is like our head of department on the Instagram and ideas floor. Emily Rainier keeps a watchful eye, as does Kelly Mitchell too, over the Facebook group. Our play-out song this week, we always have a song that just accompanies the last few frames we make with our camera. This week it's from Paper Planes. It's called Midnight. It's not long enough, this song. I feel like editing it longer. I love it, though. It's a beautiful piece of music, and a very appropriate. It's a bit Jose Gonzalez, maybe, if you squint a bit. It was mentioned earlier. I would like to play, by the way, Jose Gonzalez on the show, but the archaic copyright laws in podcast sphere mean that I can't. One day it will change, I'm sure. So in the meantime, our play-out song today is from Paper Planes. It's called Midnight, and I'll return after this with a final postscript thought.
Don't wait for me, honey. Don't wait. 'Cause I'm always heading your way. And I know exactly what I'm looking for. And as we go, I'll keep running till I can't no more. You'll always be the one I want at midnight. You'll always steal my breath away, yeah. You'll always be my heart and my life, every second, every day.
That's Paper Planes and Midnight. Let's make a final picture, pups, from our photo walk today. Final frame of the day, final sketchbooker. I like this. It's a regular walk that we take along the canal and then into this, it's sort of semi-private woodland, but nobody's really ever complained. I go along a track, which to me, I think that is the footpath. There's a very scrubbed off public access sign. So I have always taken that as permission. Shutter speed 1/60th, f5.6, ISO 160. There we go. Well, felt a bit rushed. Let's take a moment. Oh, let's recompose. Put the tree here in the right-hand corner. There we go. That felt better. I think with our postscript, I want to end this week with Mehmet Murat İlden. We started with him. We'll conclude with him today, the Turkish thinker. He nails the simplicity of the act of walking and making pictures without meaning to. I'm sure I have a strong feeling that when he penned these words, he was not thinking photography at the time. But these words, I think, sum up perfectly what we try to do, you and I, together. On this photo, and Barney, sorry, on this, he looked back at me then, on this photo walk. If the road is beautiful, walk the road slowly. Be a turtle, be a snail, and even better than this, stop walking and live the road fully. Isn't that great, Barney? You like that one? I think that's one of my favourites. Do you think we stand a chance in this podcast awards? You're not really interested, are you? I can tell. I would take you. I'd let you bark. I would. When we come second or third, fourth, fifth, seventh. Why are you pulling on your lead?
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.
Pub time, isn't it? Treat of pub time. Sounds perfect.